name is Lisa Lasagna, and I am one of the CISCA Off-Water Course Committee members. And I would like to say hello and welcome to everyone. Tonight's CISCA presentation is on using wind and weather apps for paddle planning. Oh, and I'm just going to ask, if you're making noise in the background, could you mute yourself? There you go. Thanks. Our presenter tonight is Alan Campbell, our CISCA president. When Alan started kayaking over 20 years ago, he and his buddies in the Catfish group would gather their information on wind and weather from the General Environment Canada forecast. As one can imagine, this information was very general and not often terribly accurate or useful to kayakers who tend to paddle close to the shore. Over time, a number of electronic applications have been developed to help kayakers determine conditions they may encounter and to make plans for safe travel. Tonight, Alan will show how he routinely uses apps and websites such as Windy, Big Wave Dave, Predict Wind, and others while planning paddles. Questions, if you have them, can be typed into the chat feature on Zoom, and we will aim for answering them at the end of the presentation. And I will just also let you know that tonight's presentation is being recorded, so in a day or two or three, it will be available on the CISCA YouTube channel if you know anybody who missed it or you wanted to see it to refresh yourself on some of the information. So with that, I will turn it over to Alan.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lisa. I appreciate it. Nice intro. I was out paddling today. I think many of you might have been, hopefully somewhere, because it was a lovely day. Tomorrow, not so much. And this is the West Coast for you, you know, spring one day and winter the next, and cool, calm one day and wild, windy the next. So that's kind of what motivates us all to try to learn as much as we can about the wind and weather. And it's terrific, actually, that there are so many, you know, electronic applications now that are available, and that the authorities have put a lot more effort into making them easily understood. So I want to show you, and I'm not saying I am the best by any means, but I'll show you what I do, what I use, and why I use it. And then I want to work through an example of how I would use this to plan a paddle. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to work it through in a way to plan the paddle I'm doing tomorrow, which is a Thursday paddle. I plan Thursday paddles most every week, and tomorrow, it turns out, it's rather nasty. So it's good to get information in advance, knowing what to expect, and then you make a choice about where you plan to paddle, who you're paddling with, are they up to the conditions, and what are your options, and so forth. But we'll get into that. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. What I want to do, I'll just share my screen, begin to share my screen here, and then we'll go through a presentation that I've put together. And after I've done that, we can, you know, talk about any questions or any better ideas that you might have for doing this. So I think now you should be able to see that. Nice
Yep.
picture. Anybody recognize that picture?
Brooks Peninsula. No.
Yeah, that's from the north of the Brooks. And that little thing over here is the infamous Solander Island. So that lies off the Brooks Peninsula. There is a weather station on Solander Island. And some people will know that I was part of a group who were on the South Brooks some years ago. And we had actually started north of the Brooks. We were trying to get back after having had a lovely trip. And we kept checking the wind at Solander Island. It was never dropped below 20 knots. And we even had some help from home. I think that was Rob Zacharias was giving us, you know, by text to our inReach, was giving us updates, and it really never did drop. So we went south. We ended up having a helicopter ride, that one, to avoid possible problems at the end of the Brooks Peninsula. So I put this picture here really to say that this is an area where you do have to be careful always. But in fact, all parts of the coast, even right here in Victoria, and we've seen enough wild weather, I think, this winter and fall season to know that you really can't relax when you're planning to be out on the ocean. You have to take into account what you might expect and be prepared as you can for it to be safe. And then you will enjoy it all the much more. So paddle planning, to start with, this is the basic publication you're going to want to become familiar with if you're not already. And as a, it's a kind of a good news, bad news story. It used to buy these volumes. Each volume was, I think, $20. This is the one covering, as you see, Juan de Fuca Strait and the Strait of Georgia, put out by the Government of Canada, Fisheries and Oceans. And but they no longer print them. So they're only available online. The good news is they're free. So you can download this to your computer just by going to, I put the website there. And by the way, I'm going to make this presentation and also just a kind of one-page list of websites available afterwards as well. Hopefully we can figure out how to put that in a place where people can access it. So, but if you want to just make a note, you can easily Google Canadian tide and current tables and you'll get this. And so this has all the information you're ever going to need. It's a very long volume and takes a bit of getting around. I thought just to show you, the tides at Victoria. So when I think about paddling here, just to begin thinking about it, I usually try to, we're in a big peninsula area here with looking both east and west and somewhat north and south. So we have all sorts of options. I tend to look at Victoria City as a kind of a center point to this whole region. And Race Passage is one of the two main current sites that the Canadian government maintains. And Race Passage, of course, to the west in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, it's a good place to find information about generally what the tides are, what the current is. Of course, the current times will change depending on where you are in the region, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But I'll just show you, and then we're going to go through this a few times. If you're to click on this particular one, this is what you get in Fisheries and Oceans Canada, this page. And this little graphic here, I think you can see my mouse moving around. If you see, as I hover over various places where they have currents, or these are tide stations, it comes up. And if I were to click on one of them, like that one, now it moves to—
It hasn't switched from your previous page yet.
It hasn't?
No, it's still at the tides and current table page.
Still at the tide and current tables. Okay. So now we're going to have to do something different. Okay, so I'll just tell you that we'll get to that point when I can show you in more detail what the tides are within that volume and the currents are, and I'll move on rather than stick with it here. So here are my recommendations for wind forecast sites and apps. These are the ones it was mentioned that I use. Environment Canada, the basic one, and you'll find marine weather for Pacific, South Coast. Predict Wind, this is the only one I actually pay for. And I think I pay, maybe it's $30 a year. And I have the ability then to hold on to 8 different sites that I'm interested in getting predictions about. But we'll see more about that in a minute. I also, though, look at Wind Alert, which uses the same algorithm as something called Sail Flow, which is also used. Windy, Wind Finder, Big Wave Dave, and I use Spot WX, which is short for weather, spot weather. So why do I use all these things? Well, here's my philosophy, and take it as information. I like to try to understand what people, what the best minds here, kind of putting this wind and weather information out there, believe to be going to happen in my area. So I look for what each of them are saying, and I look for commonalities. I look for convergence. I try to see if they're all saying it's going to be westerly winds of a certain magnitude or roughly, then that gives me some confidence that that's actually going to happen. If they're spread around the compass rows and they're at different strengths, then my conclusion is they don't really know. You know, the algorithms aren't giving much confidence here, and I probably should be careful or just take that into account as I make my choices. So that's why I try all these different ones, and I'm going to look at each of them and show you what I can about that very briefly, because you could spend a lot of time doing this. And I recommend, by the way, that you just go in and check these out and play around and see what you can find. So let's see if this one works now. So this is Environment Canada, the marine weather for Pacific Coast. Let's see. Does that change?
No,
No, okay. So in that case, I'm going to go back here to my share. And I'm going to show you. I have to stop share, I think. Stop the share. Start it up again. And I'm going to show you what now, my main screen, I think. Okay, now you're just going to see my main email screen here. If I get out of that. Okay. I'm going to share this one. How about that? Can you see marine weather Pacific South Coast?
Yeah.
Okay. So so this is that particular link to the Environment Canada site, and you'll see that they have a graphic, and there's a lot of red on the graphic. So as you can imagine, red is not good, warning. There's no warning or watch in a few areas. As it happens, they're not too far away from us. We're down here. But it might be just worth pointing out that what we have here in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, which is this little area here, the blue part up here, this is the west entrance, as you can see, west entrance to the strait. This is the central strait, and this is the east Juan de Fuca East. Just for information, Juan de Fuca East, it ends at the east at Discovery Island. And on the west, it ends around Souk, or Sheringham, that area. So it's quite useful to know about Juan de Fuca East. And this blue one that comes next is Harrow Strait, the strait moving up from Juan de Fuca towards the Strait of Georgia. So Harrow Strait and Juan de Fuca East are often of interest. And I'll just show you what you get when you go to those particular ones. Harrow has no warning right now. So if I bring that up, I think you can see that. So winds, and this is issued at 4 p.m. Many of you will know that they issue the wind forecasts at 4, 9:30 p.m., at 4 o'clock in the morning, and at 10:30 a.m. So 4 times a day, they'll have a new forecast here, and for each of those forecast areas. So what they're looking at for tomorrow, and I have this summarized later on in the PowerPoint, is basically this part I'm going to highlight here. It's southwest 15 to 25 early Thursday morning, and that probably means overnight early, like 2 in the morning or something, and becoming southwest 15 early Thursday afternoon. So that's kind of settling down, but still significant, and it's by afternoon. So through the morning, it's got that kind of wind velocity, and it's southwest, if you can remember that. And then we're going to go to the east entrance, where there is a gale warning in effect. And here we have, if I go to basically tomorrow morning, because tonight and Thursday is a little confusing, but here's Thursday, southwest 25 to 35, early Thursday morning, again overnight, and then diminishing to west 20 Thursday evening. So through the day dropping down, but those are big numbers. Those are big winds, a gale warning in effect. So worth being careful about. And now let me just see if I just open up one of these. I thought I'd show you too. This is sort of my computer's home screen here with the nice picture. But across the top, I've got some, these are bookmarks. I don't know if you do this on your device, your computer, or you can do it on your iPhone or your phone or tablet or whatever. Make it quick and easy to get into things. So you can see this is the one that I was just at, Pacific South Coast Marine Weather. And you can also go into, I can go into the other apps just by saving their locations as a bookmark, and then it's quick and easy for me to do that. I'm going to just go back and stop that share. This could be a bit discombobulating, so I apologize for that. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint and see where I'm at here now with that. Yeah, so this was the one I was on before, and I couldn't follow the link within the thing. And what I'm going to do is I'll show you where I'm going, then I'll go back to my screen and I'll take you through these. This is predict wind. This is just a picture of one of the images you can see there, and that's the link. Wind alert, that's typically what it looks like. Windy, wind finder, which is a bit different, not so graphic, more of just charts, bars and charts. Big Wave Dave, which is now called windisgood.com, and Spot WX. So those are the ones I'm going to just cover here in a minute. And to do that, and then we're going to go on to talk about this. But before I do that, I'm going to stop that share and go back to my my regular screen. And then I can get into those places. Okay, so predict wind. This is predict wind. This is a really sophisticated application, wind forecast application. It has a whole bunch of features. I'm not going to possibly show you them, but you can see down the left-hand side here, forecasts. They have a daily briefing, which is a summary, forecast table, so a tabular version, graphs, if you like graphs, wind maps, which is actually what we're looking at here. These are wind maps. They're active and they show you the wind moving. By the way, this is the wind that we would be seeing in this area, or based in this area about now. So they have gust maps, and you see quite a few more things here. I'm going to just show you later a new tool that they've developed called validation, which is quite interesting, because you always wonder, okay, yeah, well, you know, these things are fine, but do they really work? I mean, often you hear a forecast, you go out and it's not like that. And so you sort of lose confidence in it. And so the validation tool is something this particular app has developed to check on their success rate. They actually rate it. I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so forecasts for, I'm looking at, here's Gordon Head. I'll explain why in a minute. And if I do that, I guess I'm already there. I can see this image. I kind of like this straightforward version with just tables. And you can see that they go out for several days with their forecasts. Blue is good, lighter is even better. But these more colorful areas, not so good, right? This is where the wind is happening. So unfortunately, we're looking at Thursday, starts here, and this is from 10, let's say, to 3 might be the time that you would be looking at paddling. And if you look down, you see some pretty deep color. So that's what they're looking at, thinking about for Gordon Head. And this is wind direction in here. So that's kind of how that works. I might just show you the rest. They have rainfall prediction, cloud cover. Won't bother telling about Cape, the pressure, the temperature, you know, a lot of stuff here, wave height. So they've got a lot of information. Mostly we're just thinking here about the wind and the wind direction. And then, I mentioned before, I pay for this one so I can keep these locations. I change them depending on what I'm looking at, but I can look at different locations depending on where I'm interested in paddling, and then I can quickly get back to that place. That's all that is. You can use this app for free, and you simply don't have the ability to keep 9 different locations available to you, but it's free. So that's predict wind. And then the next one I was going to show you is wind alert. As I said, that's the same algorithm as what's called SailFlow. And it's very good. This is one, if you follow the West Coast Dave Ostapovich's own site, he has some wind links on there, and he favors SailFlow and wind alert. And so this is what you might see there. Basically, we see again the land around where we are. And these points are places where wind predictions are available from. And so you can kind of pick that up. Here's Discovery Island. If I click on that, I can get a forecast of Discovery Island. And I get this graphic. I don't know if I can move it around, guess not. Anyway, here's Thursday, the colorful day. As you see, Friday drops right off. If you see above, the numbers sort of follow the colors. So that's true there, and it's probably true most places, although very calm right now. I was out this way earlier today, but tomorrow, not so much. So calm, extremely windy, and then calm again. We've got that sort of pattern going on right now. So that's wind alert. Then to move on, Windy. Windy is quite a good app. It has lots of options, different algorithms built into it, as does Predict Wind and several of the others. You can move around the place that you're interested in forecasting. If I wanted to see this place, I just have to, I'm making a right tap on my mouse here, and I can tap off the end of, this is the, the golf course there at Oak Bay. It's not that specific. It'll probably be just about the same as that, but you can get a forecast for this location, then you'll see that this sort of stuff down below has changed a little bit. And there's a slightly different forecast here. So again, find Thursday and you can see what you've got for moving this so I can see a bit more. You can see what you've got is some color for sure. And it's going everywhere from 23 to 37 through the paddling day tomorrow in that location. So that's windy. Next, I'm going to look at Wind Finder. Wind Finder uses a different format. And within a day of the prediction you're looking for, you can get a super forecast. So that gives you more specificity. Here we're seeing the Discovery Island again, and this is going out for about 6 days. And if I do a super forecast, then I get just a few days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And so if I look at Thursday, again, this is for Discovery Island, same story, roughly, right? And these are extremely high wind values here in the 40 knot range. These are, or miles per hour. So that's something else to check, that these are just their default settings. I haven't really set them. So this is miles per hour, not nautical miles, but statutory miles. And some of them use kilometers and so forth. So something to pay attention to, make sure you're not misinterpreting what you're seeing. Then Big Wave Dave. Well, why would we think about Big Wave Dave? He's a windsurfer, right? But Big Wave Dave, as a windsurfer, is very interested in the wind near the shore. So he's using data. They share the data that's collected mostly by government agencies out in the big ocean and so forth, and the main forecasts that are made. They take that as their starting point, these wind forecast sites, and they develop their own proprietary way of predicting wind in various areas. So basically, Big Wave Dave is interested in the near shore winds, and so are we. So he's got two models. He's got model 1, which is shown here, and model 2 I'll show you in a second. Model 1, somewhere here, it'll tell me, maybe here. I won't bother with that, but they're different algorithms are used. So under model 1, we'll just look at island view, and this is Wednesday, so we can see what Thursday looks like tomorrow. Very windy here, Dallas, Gordon, etc. Willows, a little bit less than island view. And that's, remember the big forecast, the Environment Canada forecast for the Harrow Strait was lower than Juan de Fuca Strait. And you have to turn a corner to get up into Harrow Strait. So often the wind doesn't in the same force turn that corner, and it means it's a little bit lower. So in island view tomorrow, they're looking about 15 knots, and the little arrow here shows you the wind direction. That's southwest, right? To the left would be west, north is, up above you and so forth. So they're just using that graphic to give you the wind direction. So that's useful to know that near the shore, island view, Big Wave Dave thinks it's going to be about 15 knots. They probably would think that's not enough wind. They probably want that big wind that's coming out of Juan de Fuca. In model 2, if I go to model 2 and look at island view for Thursday, it's a bit different. Now, Model 2, I happen to know, and you can find this in the notes in Big Wave Dave's site. Model 2 is using a narrower resolution. So another thing to keep in mind when you're trying to gauge the value of a wind forecast is, what's the size of the area that they are predicting for? Is it maybe 5 miles circle or radius? Or is it 100 miles? Because they're both out there. Those kinds of predictions are available, and you just need to know what you're looking at and choose something that works for you. This one, the Model 2, that's available within a day or two of your sort of looking for something, is within 2.5 kilometers. So that's very close to the area that you're interested in. That means really kind of Island View Beach and its immediate kind of environment there. They're thinking, in this case, more like 15 to 20 knot winds from the southwest again.
Wow.
And I think there's one more. Yeah, Spot. So Spot is an interesting site. And again, all these ones, every one of these you can use for free, and you can get a lot of information without paying anything. So don't feel the need to buy anything. I'd say try it out, and if there's something that's particularly useful, then you might want to pay a bit of money for it. But otherwise, just enjoy the free service that they put out there to try to get your business. In this case, it has shows you a map. You click to where you are interested in finding a wind forecast, let's say 10 Mile Point. And if I just click that, it moves the little target. And now that's where it's going to be thinking for what kind of forecast we want. This is a forecast that is same forecast actually that Big Wave Dave was just using. So the 2.5 kilometer resolution, as you can see, and it's within 2 days. So, you can have more confidence in something that's coming up soon and that has a small area of resolution. And if I want to bring this up as a separate tab, just to show you what that looks like, it'll load up here, and it gives you graphs. So this particular app uses graphs. It has one for temperature, precipitation, and then wind. So this is the one we're interested in. And look over here on the left, and you can see they're showing wind speed in kilometers per hour. So kilometers are about half a nautical mile, roughly. So what you can do, if you're used to thinking in nautical miles or knots of wind, then you can take these values, these numerical values, and divide by 2 to kind of relate it to something you would normally think through. So basically this is 11 or 10 o'clock in the morning through till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you can see the wind is very close to, say, 40 kilometers, which is about 20 knots. This is what Spot is suggesting. That's the base wind, and it has a bit of an angle. It looks like they're thinking here would be southwest for the area around 10 Mile Point. These dots up here are showing gusts, and it shows up in the little box that appears as I move it around. So if I just point to the highest one there, you'll see at 1 p.m., 10 meters above the surface of the water, from the west-southwest, there's going to be, they think, about 20 knots of wind, but about gusts at about 35 or 36 knots. Those are strong gusts. And the base wind is quite strong as well. So that's a very windy place to be, something to bear in mind. And they give you the pressure as well there, but there's more information about pressure elsewhere in this app too. They show you winds at different elevations in the bottom one here, but we're just interested in the lowest, the 10-meter wind. Of course, we're right at water level, but 10 meters is where they stop. So that's Spot. And I think that's where I was going to finish up. So I'll just stop that share there and come back into PowerPoint. Let's see if I can do this. Oh yeah. So you kind of put that aside for a minute. We are going to come back, and I'm going to actually work through an example, which, as I said at the beginning, is going to be, what about tomorrow? What if we want to plan a paddle tomorrow? Where can we do that with some safety and without taking too big a risk? But before I get there, I thought about this today, so I just sort of threw these in. I wanted to make sure that you were aware of the current atlas. So another, as you can see the logo down here at the bottom, another government publication is Current Atlas, and they offer them in different areas. And you used to buy this too, but happily now it's also free. It's available online in digital format, and you can download it. It is a really amazing piece of work, but to be honest with you, I don't find it all that useful myself, but I'll tell you about it and you can decide for yourself if you want to look into it. The Current Atlas is a thick volume in which, for different times of the day and the season and so on, that readings have been taken that show you the current direction in various areas. In this case, in Juan de Fuca Strait and the Strait of Georgia. It's amazing, right? You think, wow, I can actually know where those currents go. And they do show you in a graphic way, which I'll show you in a minute, what currents you might expect at different times. Now, the trick is this volume is a sort of a compendium of pages that show you that, but you're not sure which one to refer to. However, there are tables, and this is a free set of tables on this link, Borsboom, that allow you from the date that you're thinking about to find the right tables, right pages in the Current Atlas tables. So you have to kind of check that and then go to the Current Atlas to the right page. If you do, you see something like this. So this is a page from the Current Atlas. I'm kind of getting in my own way here. The Current Atlas shows you the speed. I've done something odd. All right, move this up here. Shows you the speed with the kind of arrows. As you might imagine, the very thick arrows, here you can see them around. This is the Trial Island, Oak Bay Islands, 10 Mile Point, Baines Channel area. They're quite thick. So we have strong currents in that area on this particular positioning. And the narrower arrows show less speed. And there's a bit of a legend up here. So this is all to be the case at a particular time of day and a particular day of the month in a given year. And that's what the Borsboom I mentioned, but tables you can buy. There's also Murray's tables and some other tables that you can buy, but Borsboom are, the link I showed is one that's available free online. That just helps you find the right page in the Current Atlas. But let's say you've done that and this is the right page you're looking at. And I didn't check the time and so forth or the day, but let's just say it's, 10 o'clock in the morning or something. And you were thinking of coming from Telegraph Cove, which is up here, and coming around and over to, Chatham and Discovery Island. Well, you're going to encounter a strong flood current, according to this page. So doesn't mean that you shouldn't go. It just means that's something to bear in mind. It's going to tend to push you in that direction. And so you may want to think, well, maybe I'll go from Oak Bay Marina instead, use the flood and get that flood to help me. I could maybe, start here and the flood could actually float me over to the islands at that time of day. So it gives you that sense. Now, the other that's interesting thing though, is you probably noticed that some of these arrows are going sort of in circles. And in fact, that is the case. There are whorls, there are, lots of big, basically back eddies that form in and around our shorelines because of all the obstructions, both ones you can see that are islands and ones that are under the surface of the water. You may not be able to see them as well, but they affect the water flow. So it's complicated. After a while, my view is if after a while you've taken reasonable precautions and the flood in this area is about, so, looking at something like this is just a bit too detailed. For my liking, I tend to not pay a great deal of attention to it, although it does help you. And I'm going to tell you that there's a kind of a handy way that you might be able to do it if you're really quite interested. So that's what a Current Atlas page looks like. Now, my friend Lynn Beyer, I'm not sure if Lynn's on the line, but she is very modern and she uses her iPhone extensively with her paddling. And she has an app on her iPhone called Tiny Octopus. So Tiny Octopus is an app that's been developed to create, this is on the phone or another device right here, this image, to create the current atlas images for you. And you just, in the app, you say what day it is and what time it is. And then you can just kind of go forward and backward using the buttons, the arrows here, and it steps you through it. And you can see it without having to check some table and then go back in a, you know, a big paper book and so forth. So these people have come up with this. They've put the work into it, and of course they charge you for it. I don't know what it costs, but if you're interested in the current atlas and you find the paper version to be too cumbersome, you may think about Tiny Octopus, and there it's just tinyoctopus.net. You can get it for your device if you wish. So that's the sort of information that's available on currents from a public point of view. I'm going to see if I can move this around. We also have in this area, we're very fortunate to have excellent paddle planning sites. And I imagine you know about them, but I thought I'd just mention them as well. West Coast Dave, who is Dave Ostapovich, and Dave is has been a Siska member from the beginning of the club. He's actually one of our founding members, and he's our webmaster, a very talented guy. Dave's put together a paddle planning website for the South Island, well worth looking at. And I'm going to look at it with you in just a minute, just to make sure you know that it's there. And then I couldn't not mention BC Marine Trails, because this is a terrific project that has been undertaken, started by people in the Central Island around Nanaimo. And they think a lot of people in that area have put a lot of effort into it, but many of our members too. And some of them who are online here today are very involved with BC Marine Trails. And that's a great tool online for planning coastal day paddles, not just around your own local area, but also camping trips up and down the coast. So those are great paddling sites that we have available, and we should use them. Here's Dave O's site. This is his address here, westcoastdave.ca/kayaking. And basically it's available free to use for anybody. You can sign up to his site, doesn't cost anything. But if you want to have a profile on his site to make it easier to get in and out, you can do that. And basically it shows you, it has a map of locations, launch sites. It has a little way of giving you tides and currents and weather, and he uses wind alert, as I mentioned. This is about photos, and then he provides service to the Wednesday paddlers, which is a long time paddling group here in Victoria. So anyway, West Coast Dave, terrific site. If you haven't checked it out before, I highly recommend you do that. And then BC Marine Trails. So bcmarinetrails.org will get you to their website. This is one that you can use free, but you get a lot more for paying their annual fee, which is not that much. I think it's maybe $40. I'm not sure, $30, $40. And then you can do things that non-members can't on their map. And I think the central thing that I use mostly is their interactive map. I've just shown you here, this is a screenshot, but I've just shown you here the South Island, and all of these little blue things are launch sites. Now, Dave O has this on his too, but not quite as sophisticated. And behind these launch sites, BC Marine Trails has put a great deal of information. And then just imagine that kind of information is available between here and Alaska. Basically, they have developed this site, and it continues to develop. And that project is an ongoing one. So well worth your support, and take a look at it if you haven't already, BC Marine Trails. Now, what I'm going to say in general is that how do you kind of get ahead of things? We're going to do an exercise, as I mentioned, but just in theory, how do you do it? Well, just plan a paddle regularly, or plan paddles regularly, and that will build your skills in knowing how to do it and what to anticipate and what not. Find a few paddlers that you enjoy being with, And I'd suggest you plan a kayak paddle every week. I go a couple of times a week, and I've been doing that for years. And I've been at each time I go, I look up these things, even if it's not my responsibility to lead the paddle. I look it up, and then I realize what we encountered, and I learn from having done that. So if you take turns planning your paddles, that's fair, and you can learn by doing. And then I thought we'd maybe just work through an example of that, and you can see how that works. And the example is going to be tomorrow. So again, what are the currents and tides? And I think I'm going to find I can't get there from here. So I might have to confuse you a bit by taking this back to my main screen again. So we're going to look at the currents at Race Passage and the tides at Victoria. Let me just make sure it's where I am. Oh, maybe I can just move right ahead with that. Might make it easier. Rather than go to it and you'd see a whole screen full of numbers, I have already extracted those things and put it into this slide. So I looked at January 20th, tomorrow, and for Race Passage, these are the currents that are listed by Environment Canada. So if you are used to reading these tables, you know that they give you one column. And the dates are, of course, all the dates in every month of the year. This is the turn of the current. So this is where it's turning from flood to ebb or back again. And the second column is the maximum that they estimate, the time that the maximum is going to be reached. And the maximum value is in the final column. And these are in knots or nautical miles per hour, right? So if you have a sense of what those speeds are, it helps. If you like, when you paddle, in a fairly relaxed, but, I guess, energetic way, you're probably going about 3 knots, 2.5 or 3 knots. That's your speed. So these values that we're looking at here for if we see a positive or not a negative number, at least in this case, that will be a flood value, and the negative is an ebb value. So this is a kind of a medium flood, and this is a little bit stronger ebb, and then a little bit less of a flood and a little bit less of an ebb later, late tonight or late tomorrow night. So that's the currents at Race Passage. And when I think about it, just getting set for planning a paddle, I like to see what those currents are. The time of the currents at Race is not the same time as in Victoria or in Sydney or wherever you may happen to be, but it gives you a reference point, and you can actually calculate it and find it for those other places as well. But just for purposes of this discussion, I thought I'd use Race Passage itself. So you can see that if we were thinking of a paddle from about 10 to 3, which is very typical, we will be we'll be completely in an ebb, because it starts at 9:17, turns from the flood. At 1:18, it's maxing at minus 4.1. The ebb is maxed. And then it turns again at about 5:20 p.m. So between 9 and 5, basically all day, we have an ebb at Race Passage. Those times will differ when you look at other areas, but I wonder if I could just ask you to think about what do you think the difference in time is for currents between Race Passage, which is, about, 10 miles or thereabouts to the west of Victoria, and Baines Channel, which is right off 10 Mile Point. Does anybody know what the time relationship is between the currents at Race and at 10 Mile Point? If you know, just unmute yourself and say something. No? Okay, well, the answer is that the currents at Baines Channel, 10 Mile Point, are always 15 minutes ahead of the currents at Race Passage. And I have to tell you, it's always puzzled me why that's the case. But there you go, that's apparently the story. The currents then are quite similar in time, let's say, if in the Victoria, Oak Bay, sort of central city area, to race passage. So it's a good idea to look at it from that point of view. And then I also like to look at the tide levels, because then you get a sense of, well, how difficult is it going to be to get on and off the water? You know, what's the exchange? How much water is moving out? You do have a sense of that from how fast the current has moved, but not always. So if I were to look here now at Victoria tides, and this is probably at Victoria Harbor, I think. I didn't check that, but anyway, Central Victoria, let's call it. And this is tomorrow. We have 3 columns. Again, we have the time and we have the height in meters and feet. I'm afraid I still think in feet when I work on these things. So, but you can see whichever way you cut it, in the middle part of the day, let's call it, whoops, I think I just went up too much. Middle part of the day, there's really not much difference. It goes from 8.5 down to 8.2 and back up to 8.9. And then it's going to drop again. But let's say by about 3, when we're going to be finished, it's probably around about 8. So it has stayed in the 8-foot range all day. Now 8 feet is a moderate tide. In this area, it's certainly not a low tide or a very low tide, but it's not the highest tide we get either. So there's going to be some beach, and there's going to be an opportunity for you to maybe see some things because they're flooded that you might not see otherwise if you're in lower lying areas and so on. So that gives you an idea both about the currents and the tides. And so then taking that information, you can, I'm just going to click on that. You can plan a paddle and bear that in mind. You know, you've got a moderate ebb and a high tide, fairly high tide that doesn't change much. So that's something that's kind of factors to bear in mind as you're planning your paddle. Now, here's the real thing we're talking about mostly tonight. What about the wind? You know, it's fine with the current and the tide, but what's happening with the wind? So I always start with Environment Canada, their marine forecast for Pacific Coast South. And we looked at that earlier, and I kind of pasted it in here earlier this afternoon after I got home. So this is their 4 o'clock forecast. And we have these numbers that I mentioned before in Harrow Strait, southwest, overnight basically, and becoming 15 early afternoon. In Juan de Fuca, southwest, 25 to 35, very strong in early hours, and then diminishing to west 20. So still quite strong. Kind of westerly though, and we got southwest and westerly winds. So I'm just going to stop the share here, and because it's kind of nice to be able to see people a little bit. So what do you think about those forecasts? What's your sense of it? Like, just throw out your ideas. Is that just way too much? Is there any place that you think you might be able to safely paddle with winds of that type tomorrow? What do you think?
Trent is running to the hills.
Well, we've got westerly winds, and this is very typical, of course, in our area. They come roaring up the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and they turn, and they become southwesterly, perhaps as they reach the bottom of the island there. But they are from that direction. So do you think that, and you know about lee shores, I'm sure, that if you have a shoreline that is against the wind, it's on the direction the wind is coming from, and there's a significant landmass there, an island, cliff or whatever. If you're down below that, if you're right in tight to it, then you can avoid much of the wind. So what we try to do, and what I try to do when I see strong wind forecasts, and I'm still committed to paddling somewhere, doing something, then I look for a lee shore. I look for a shoreline that allows some protection, some ability for that wind to be stopped or very much diminished. And what I'm going to explain next is in this area, we have a couple of options that are readily available. One is the Saanich Inlet. And although Saanich Inlet is, generally not a hugely exciting place to be, because it's quiet, and that's its great advantage. It is a fjord. it is really surrounded by high land on all sides except to the north, pointing up there towards Salt Spring Island. So generally, unless the wind direction is right in line with the part of Saanich Inlet you're in, you're going to get some protection and often quite a bit. And you may find that there's very little wind there when there's very strong wind out in the strait. Now, I have to quickly say that when wind gets to a very high strength, I'm not sure about tomorrow, but the wind values that are, say, 30 or 40 knots or more, then it will find ways to invade even very calm, generally calm areas like Saanich Inlet. But in this case, Saanich Inlet is worth considering. If you think about Brentwood Bay and the ferry wharf there, you've probably been at that beach by the ferry wharf. You know that you come out of Brentwood Bay's kind of populated area, you tend to cross over to Willis Point. And as you're running along out to Willis Point, you are against a sort of, that's the south and probably southwesterly direction. So you're going to get quite a bit of protection in there. As you turn around Willis Point to go down, you may now feel that wind, depending on how strong it is and whether it's come all the way over the land from the Strait of Juan de Fuca, or it may actually be much reduced by the time that flow kind of comes into the reaches of Saanich Inlet. Just a couple more mentions of that, because we use Saanich Inlet quite a bit then in very difficult weather, because it is a safer place to paddle. But there's a part of Saanich Inlet called Squally Reach. And it's a place where, in fact, you often get some strong winds coming down. It's a sort of a dog leg. So Saanich Inlet south, that part of Saanich Inlet goes south from Willis Point and then turns more to the west for a short distance and then continues on more to the south. And in that little dogleg area, that's called Squally Reach, you can often get some whipped up winds that'll give you a little bit of something to paddle against in that area and something to be aware of. But those are sort of local issues, and by and large, Saanich Inlet is pretty good. The other one is what I call Gordon Head, anywhere from 10 Mile Point up to Cormorant Point and beyond, probably up to Cordova Bay, but certainly up to Cormorant Point is a shoreline paddle. And there are a few places where westerly winds, strong westerlies and southwesterly winds will get through, like Arbutus Cove, Finnerty Cove, but mostly it is stopped by the landmass, which, if you think, goes from there all the way back over to Esquimalt and Victoria. So the wind has hit that and has kind of slowed and changed by the time it reaches there. And if you stay in close to the shore, then you're probably going to get quite a bit of protection. So those are the two places I know about. There may be some other spots that people are familiar with as well. But in thinking about planning a paddle for tomorrow, then I thought to myself, okay, so now we're thinking about a Gordon Head or maybe Saanich Inlet. So I thought I'd look at that. I'll show you what, this is back to the PowerPoint, because I think I put the values in here. Yeah, so this is where could we paddle? And I've suggested a couple of places. And now you check the wind forecast apps that I've just mentioned here, the various ones I do, for Gordon Head area and Saanich Inlet. Well, I mean, it still looks daunting, doesn't it? I mean, those are pretty big winds. Remember, the first value is the base wind, or the, let's call it steady wind, I guess, that you would expect, or they're forecasting. And the higher value are the gust levels that they would forecast. So from 20 to 30, those are significant winds. 20 to 40, even 35 here. And even in Saanich Inlet, 10 to 25, 20 to 35, 10 to 30, 10 to 30. I put in Big Wave Dave. Now, he just forecasts for sites where they, windsurf. So the nearest one that's of use, I thought, was Island View Beach. That's the IV here. And that, I think I showed earlier, was lower, was 15 to 20. inshore, kind of closer in to the shore. That's his prediction using a small radius forecast model, and then 20 to 30. Now, what I've learned is I get it when the difference between the base wind and the gusts are about 10 knots. That sort of seems normal, really. 5 to 10 knots, that seems normal. But when you get a difference between wind value, base wind value, and the gust of 20 knots, or, you know, here's 15, here's another 20, 20 here and here in these predictions, what that tells me is that the model, the algorithm, is not processing this information very well. And it's because, I think, it's got, because of the areas that we've chosen. So we've chosen areas that have some shelter. And if you think about the algorithm that's trying to factor in things like land to the forecast wind values, then it has difficulty making that prediction, more so than if it was on the open ocean, let's say, or a bigger area of water that's unobstructed. So I tend to put more focus on the steady state winds and think about the gust values as maybe they aren't going to be that much, at least in the areas that I'm going to try and paddle, but I should be prepared for a base wind that's not too different from, in this case, 15 to 20 knots. And it's going to be gusty, but whether it's going to be 20 knots more gusty or not, I'm not sure. It could be, but I rather doubt it. And the same in Saanich Inlet. And I have to say, Saanich Inlet, I think the forecast models have a real hard time with that area. Often you get a forecast for quite high winds there that really don't materialize at all. And it may be because it is a steep fjord, steeply sided fjord that really does deflect, or most of the wind is dissipated and doesn't hit you down at the water, certainly not by the shoreline where you might be, where you probably are going to be, because if you're paddling on a day that's very windy, like this one, you don't want to be too far from shore. I mean, you're going to avoid a lot of open ocean or open water crossings. So that's the next step in thinking about this. You've looked at the tides, the currents, you've looked at Environment Canada's forecast and looked at the wind forecast apps. And then you think, okay, so what are the issues here? What would I do? Where would I go? How would this work out? And so in Gordon Head, let's just say, if you know this area, you can look it up on a map or a chart. From Telegraph Cove, the end of Telegraph Bay Road, to Cormorant Point is about 3 nautical miles, actually. It's not a long distance. It is a shoreline paddle. There's kind of little coves and things, headlands you go around. So, and there are 1 or 2 places where wind can come through, but it's relatively protected. What are the problem areas? Well, in the Gordon Head, I would say, and I mentioned this, and you'd see it as you're on the water and you look in at, Queen Alexandra Children's Hospital there, whatever it's called now. That's in Arbutus Cove, or I think it's called Finnerty Cove too. The wind, it's low lying. And so the wind somehow comes through there. You always feel that, even a slighter wind. If you're paddling along, you get more of a breeze coming from the west if it's a westerly in that area. So that's a potential problem. Another one, and this is where, and I'd suggest if you paddle every week or you try to get out regularly, you just get to kind of know areas. So there's another section of this paddle that's a little further down from that cove, and it has a whole series of, I'd say it'd be about maybe 300 meters or so of fairly steep cliff edge. And what this does is it won't be an issue in this case because the wind is westerly. But if it was an easterly wind coming in, even a smaller easterly wind than we're discussing here, then it would have waves crashing into that rock wall. And of course, they crash back, and so you get that kind of mixing of waves that we call clapetus, I think. It's the reflecting wave. It can be very topsy-turvy and unsettling for people. So that's something to bear in mind. In this case, because the wind is westerly, that cliff face will actually be a very effective wind barrier. So it shouldn't be a problem. And pullouts, are there some pullouts? Like if we decide to do this and we're not comfortable, or somebody's not comfortable, is there a place we can pull out and, get a taxi back to our cars, or, just take a break until it settles down a bit? Well, yes, there is. And that's something you should be looking at. There are a number of potential pullouts along this section. And I would suggest, if you're planning a paddle and there is, fairly strong winds that are happening, then you want to have good information about those pullouts are, and be prepared to use them if you need to. I haven't mentioned, but I do want to say more about it, that we did talk about this being an ebb day, mostly an ebb, that's kind of moderate ebb. The ebb in this area, again, something you'd learn, the ebb in this area is felt more just off the shore. So if you're closer into the shore along the Gordon Head coastline, yes, you'll feel a bit of current, but you don't get a lot of current. Why that's important is that if the wind and the current are opposed in their direction, then it pushes that potential sea state up, right? The wind opposing a current, will elevate the sea state, and you'll have a higher chop, we call it sort of choppy sea state, that makes paddling difficult. In this case, the ebb is a little bit offshore of Gordon Head, and it's actually going to be moving generally sort of down that, I think it's more of a southerly direction. So it's not opposed to the wind. And in fact, if we're in close to that shoreline, we shouldn't have a wind versus current effect anyway. But that is something to bear in mind. It changes the sea state. And the sea state is what you're really dealing with when you're a paddler and you're out there. It's not any one thing, it's the combination of all of them that creates that sea state. Saanich Inlet, so let's say the Brentwood Bay Ferry beach there, and you were wanting to go down to Mackenzie Bight. Where would we be most protected from westerly and southwesterly winds? Well, I mentioned that Saanich Inlet is generally very protected, but you would be even more protected along the shoreline that is leading out to Willis Point, because that presents a high bluff barrier to the wind direction that we understand is coming or will be there. So that would give you the most. When you turn the corner at Willis Point and head more southerly, you may find in tomorrow's wind that it's choppy, that you're getting some wind in there. It really just depends how strong the wind is and whether it's found a way down. Are there problem areas? Well, I'd say that that's probably a problem area, potentially. There's actually one even before that. If you know Brentwood Bay, you know that if you come out of the little beach area past the ferry itself, there's kind of a stretch, not very far, maybe a few hundred meters over to the Willis Point headland. And that is, if you turn left or whatever, you would be going into Todd Inlet. And it's strange to say that Todd Inlet will channel winds that are coming from the southwest, because it creates a kind of a nice sort of corridor for those winds to gather and strengthen. And you can actually get quite a bit of a blow as you're just making your way over. Is that potentially a problem area? But maybe not. If the winds are low enough, it may just be a breeze that's creating a little bit of chop as you go. And then finally, in the Saanich Inlet area, are there pullouts? And I would suggest, yes, there are. There aren't as you go from Willis Point down to Mackenzie Bight, which, as you probably know, is maybe a couple of nautical miles south from Willis Point. There are a few little coves and beaches. It's kind of populated for a while. Then there's the park area. But until you get to Mackenzie Bight itself, there isn't a big beach. There's some small beaches for sure. You could pull out in an emergency. It's not a big place, and getting out of there might be another task, because it's it's not near a road or that kind of thing. So if you really were unable to continue, then you might have a problem that you'd have to simply wait for the wind to die down for. So those two areas, which seem like reasonable areas, have those kinds of issues for them. So anyway, make a long story short, and we can entertain your thoughts and questions here. But so I plan these Thursday paddles. Now, this is something else to bear in mind. If you are an experienced paddler, if you are a highly skilled paddler, you're going to be comfortable with wind and sea state, current, all that. at a level beyond somebody who is just beginning or somebody who simply hasn't developed their skills to that level. I'm not saying I have, by the way. I consider myself kind of an average, keen but average paddler. So, but the Thursday paddles, which have been going for a few years now, we do try to get out in some difficult conditions, basically in order to gain that skill, you know, to sort of push and our skill level a bit higher. So that's what I have suggested. And what I send out these things, by the way, it's an open group. If you're interested, you can just give me a shout somehow. And we send out these, they're called evites. I wanted to show you this because this is the information I've sent to the potential Thursday paddlers for this week. And I've said here, the winds are strong westerlies. And so I think it's best to launch from Telegraph, follow the shoreline. It's a high tide and so on. So this is the information we've been talking about. I've given the wind forecasts here. And as a matter of fact, these wind forecasts that I listed, and this was last night, has worsened a bit. And some of them have become a bit higher, but it's pretty much in the same ballpark. So it's sort of the same story. So I'll give all this information to people, and then they can decide, you know, is that a paddle I'm going to be comfortable with? And they probably have a sense of the paddle leader. In this case, it's me, you know, whether I'm the sort of person who's barges ahead or listens if people are uncomfortable and we decide to turn around or get off or do something different. And hopefully they have a sense that I do that. So all of these are considerations that you might want to take into account as you're thinking about planning a day paddle or having a day paddle. And that's it. That was what I wanted to share with you. There's probably a lot more can be said about it, but I think I've been talking for a while, so I want to give you folks a chance to add comments. As I said, I'm not an expert. I've just got a certain amount of experience, and or if you have some questions, and maybe we can figure them out together.
Okay, so I will start with the comments that have come into the chat.
Okay.
Debbie lets us know that Ross McDonald at Environment Canada checks windy for his information.
Yeah.
And Fred says that on the bottom of the windy page, you can hit the compare button and it'll show a total of 5 different data sets.
Yep, that's right.
And Diane Underhill says Tiny Octopus is available at the iPhone App Store as PNW Current Atlas. You can try a 3-day free trial, and then it's $28 for forever access.
Okay.
And Jenny, just as you were getting to it, Jenny had asked, what about Squally Reach in in Saanich Inlet? That we do get some winds down there. And I think this is Minbao says, hi, Alan, I'm curious about one of the Thursday paddles in the end of last year, as you describe it, quote, a too exciting 1.2 nautical mile, 20-minute paddle. For here, huge seas off Telegraph Cove last Thursday, 2 to 3 meters and breaking. I'm not kidding. Could you please talk a little bit about it, as well as sea state?
Yeah. Okay. Let me just go to that one. I'm pleased to have the reminder because, this was kind of a new experience. I thought I'd seen a lot of it, if not all of it, but that Thursday paddle before Christmas sometime was quite a surprise. And we were actually planning to paddle from Telegraph Cove, but to go up to 10 Mile Point, across to Chatham Discovery and so on. We had checked the wind forecast in just the way that I've described here, and we were getting consistent wind values around 10 to 15 knots. And I think they were west or southwest, but it was, and so 10 to 15 knots, I feel fairly confident in that type of wind. The current was potentially adverse, and so we thought we would just come out of Telegraph Cove. You turn right, you go down to the point, and you look at Baines Channel, because that's where there's those strong tides, strong currents can appear, and to see whether it's safe to go across. That was our thinking. But what we had not at all factored into account, and I do now, and I'll mention it for tomorrow, is the swell. So we live in Victoria. We're way inside here, from the open ocean. We tend not to think about swell because swell is a big Tofino kind of Port Renfrew maybe, or Jordan River, but maybe even Souk, but you just don't see swell, a big swell around Victoria. So kind of don't think about it. And we just looked at the wind and the current and this and that and thought, okay, so here we are. There were, I think, 4 of us, and we came out of Telegraph Cove. We looked at the state of the sea from the beach at Telegraph Cove, and the Telegraph Cove itself was kind of choppy. It was bouncy. We thought, okay, well, the wind is creating that, so that's okay. That's the 10 to 15. We thought that's all right. And you could see out further, and I mean quite a bit out further, we could see white caps. And we thought, okay, so it's interacting with the current out there and creating white water in the current stream, which is some bit offshore of Telegraph Cove. That's about all. And we had our discussion, and we got on the water. And I'll just say that one person is very fast and was kind of out and around the corner before I was really kind of out of the starting gate, and a couple others were in between. So anyway, what we all eventually found as we rounded the corner, turning towards Baines from Telegraph Cove, was that these were not waves. These were swells. These were very large, undulations in the water, such as you don't see here. And they were, without exaggerating, they were 2 to 3 meters, and the tops were breaking. So there was white water on top of these swells, and they were coming right over the corner of Telegraph Cove, like right over the corner. So you couldn't actually, if you paddled in that area, you can kind of come in close and you'd kind of avoid the rocks and all that. Well, there was no doing that. You stayed well away from the rocks, and you kept going straight out because these big swells were coming right at us, which, by the way, meant they were coming from the east. So these big swells were coming from the east, and as you got outside Telegraph Cove and began to turn to the right, and the fellow who was so fast was 200 or 300 meters ahead of me anyway, he had negotiated a turn, which was no small feat actually, because you're getting tipped by these great big swells as he went down towards 10 Mile Point. And I was thinking I should probably radio and just get, we should have a discussion about this. This doesn't really look like what we expected at all, but I didn't really want to take my hand off the paddle, to work my radio. So I made the turn, and I was just about to radio, thinking I don't want that person to go too far. And he stopped, and the others kind of caught up, I think. And then he started coming back. And as he passed me, he said, "I'm out of this. This is too much." I think we all had the same conclusion. This was not a safe place to be. It was definitely not 10 to 15 conditions. But I have to say the wind in that area was 10 to 15 knots. But what I learned later, looking up on these things, Kelp Reef, which is a reporting station and a forecast station out in the strait, basically due east of that area, it had been blowing at about 30 knots all night, from midnight right through to about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning. It had 30-knot winds blowing straight at Victoria, if you like. And that had created this enormous sea state, such as we really don't see. And so the big swells coming in were interacting now with kind of smaller wind waves that were going in a different direction and creating really a lot of instability in the sea state. So as Ming Bao says, we ended up 1 nautical mile paddle because we went out and turned around and were quite happy to come back in. These were surfing waves, actually. That was how big they were, but we didn't surf. Yeah, it's a rocky shoreline. We were just came back in and had a nice long coffee break. But one more thing, and this goes to my point about your skill level and so on. We thought, wow, that was amazing. Like, I'd never seen that before. We should go to 10 Mile Point. You can drive around and get right to near the point and see what it looks like there. So we drove around after we got all packed up, and we get to the point, and there's this guy in his car with a kayak on top. And we thought, oh, I wonder if he knows, that it's pretty nasty out there. So we kind of went over to him, and I think he put down the window or whatever, and it was not a problem. This guy is an expert. I can't remember his name right now. Debbie, you'll know it.
Nick Castro.
Nick Castro. So Nick is highly skilled. He was waiting for a buddy to come, and then they were going to go out and play in the big water. Well, good for Nick. I'm sure they had a great time, but that was no place for us to be, right? So you need to know what you are able to do safely and what you're not. And we quickly realized that we were talking to Nick. We shouldn't, warn him too much, but we told him what we'd seen, what it was, and he said, "Oh yeah." He was kind of excited about it. So it just shows you. It shows you what different people can take from that. But I took from it that in addition to the whole thing about wind and tides and currents, once in a while, if there is a strong wind blowing somewhere in the area, I guess even here, it can create swell. And that's another factor that you should probably take into account. Now, I hasten to say that that's not happening right now or tomorrow. It's not predicted to. We're all having these westerlies. A good thing about westerly winds, which is our predicted, sort of predominant wind direction here, southwest and west this time of year, is that it is blocked by the land over there. And so it's not coming back from, say the San Juan Islands towards us at all. All that wind is kind of getting back on the water and walloping those poor people in San Juan Island, but it's not going to create a sea state for us here in Victoria. Okay. Was there another question there from the chat or?
Not yet, not so far.
Okay, I realized that I wanted to also to show you the validation tool, and I didn't do that. Let me just see if I can share my screen and do that again somehow. So this is my computer screen. Again, I wanted to show you predict wind. And so people have mentioned Windy has many 4 or 5 different algorithms, they're called, or forecast models that they use. These are the ones that Predict Wind has. They now have 8. And what I used to do religiously, actually, was this is their own. PWG and PWE are their proprietary models. So of course they put them up first here. And I found that they were pretty good. So I used to just pay attention to them. I'd sort of glance at the rest, but that would be it. And look at the other wind apps, of course, but I had a lot of faith in PWG and PWE. But good company, I'd say, because they have added a sort of a checking tool. And it's this one right here. So we're in Gordon Head. That's what we're looking at. If I come down to this validation tool, it brings up this screen. So now for Gordon Head, winds in the Gordon Head area, they are rating here the models that they use, all 8 of them, for wind speed and wind direction in the last week and in the last month. So they've ranked them. And if you can see here, the top ranked one is ECMWF, which is a European meteorological model. It's top of the list. What about PWG? What's way down here? Now, I don't know how very different that is, but 1.5 to 2.3 in terms of the wind speed and the ranking, it doesn't impress, right? If you look at the wind direction, it's a bit different. You would think, oh, that ECMWF, that's the one to look at for everything then. Well, apparently they didn't get the wind direction right. Look at them, they're down the bottom. So and then over a month, of course, it might have just been a bad week for them, but if over a month, you can see that slightly different rankings occur. And once you've selected an area to consider, and then go to the validation tool, it will tell you how those models fared in terms of their predictiveness, I guess, over this period. So it's just worth looking at. So as a result, when I was looking at the forecast tables then for Gordon Head, although they've listed them first, I thought to myself, well, okay, they didn't do so well, you know, the last week or the last month. This one did. ECMWF here did well for strength, wind strength, and it's very strong. So, you know, still around 20 knots. And then the wind direction, well, I don't know if you remember, but the one that had the best for wind direction is this NAM. So this is wind direction down here. If you come down to NAM, well, they see it's going to be all westerly. Whereas ECMWF thinks it's going to be mostly southwest. You know, it does kind of boggle your mind just a little bit that they can be different. But I'm kind of pleased that the Predict Wind people have put in this tool that allows you to sort of check. I haven't spent a lot of time doing it, but it's useful to know that, you know, you can get some validation or not of how well they've done over the last little while.
Okay, we have a few more questions, Alan. Mark is wondering how long it takes for the sea state to die down after a day of big wind along Juan de Fuca Strait.
A good question. I would say several hours, depending on the reach, depending on the distance that the sort of whipped up seas have been able to travel and can continue to travel even after the wind is stopped. It would be, you know, few to several hours, I think. And I think about a time that I led a Siska paddle out from Whiff and Spit around to Cabin Point, and it had been very windy overnight, and they were coming straight down the Strait of Juan de Fuca, but it was no longer windy. But because we had to go out along that shoreline that leads out to Souk Point and go around it and so on, there was a lot of reflecting waves coming off the shoreline because there were still residual waves. It actually didn't feel windy. You know, it kind of felt a bit still, but the sea state was still there all the time that we went out and around. And then on the way back, Mark, there was nothing. And actually, once we got around the corner at Souk Point, there was also nothing. So Souk Point, and there's an island offshore there, I think the Secretary Islands or something are there, that just killed, you know, that residual sea state. But yeah, it's good to bear that in mind. If there's been a big wind, it may still leave something behind, depending on where you're paddling.
Okay. We have a comment from Joe Connors saying, please comment on how best to continue to monitor weather on longer trips when you are away from your computer and out of range for iPhone or iPad and where VHF reception is poor.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Joe, and one that I and several others on the line here have had some experience with. So, you know, you become sort of attuned if you're staying out, if you're doing a long trip, and I've done a number of them in exposed areas, you kind of get quite sensitized to the sea state that has come. You begin to read the clouds better, the speed of the cloud, all of that kind of stuff, right? So there are natural observations that you can make, but it is a little distressing that you don't have available to you, you know, all these things that I've been talking about that we can use here in Victoria from the comfort of our homes or even from the iPhone that you have in your cockpit, maybe. You probably don't have that if you're, you know, off the Brooks Peninsula or, you know, off the Central Coast or something. You would probably have VHF Radio Environment Canada's continuous marine broadcast, because Coast Guard Radio does provide that. There are a few places where they don't have very good reception, and that is a problem, but most areas they do. But, you know, they're forecasting for offshore. They're basically forecasting for the shipping along the coast, and it tends to be not that valuable for people like ourselves who are quite near the shore and in small craft. They're not really doing that for us. So it's often a bit frustrating to hear them talk about, you know, continuous 40-knot gales, and you're paddling along and there's hardly any wind in an area, and you're wondering, well, is there a gale about to happen, or is this does not apply to me? I have to mention InReach, because and Tony Playfair's on here too, you know, and many of us have used the InReach satellite communicator to get wind forecasts. and you can get weather forecasts too, but it's really the wind that worries us. They had a contract with a company called Dark Sky. And so you could, for the cost of a message, you could request a wind forecast for the area where you were, and I think you can still do this maybe to the end of this year. Tony can correct me if I'm wrong there. And then their contract with Dark Sky ends, and I think they'll come up with another one. But anyway, it's very useful because using the satellite communicator, you can actually get that information in pretty close to real time, right there, wherever you are. And it will give you at least another set of information points about the wind that you can use to, with what you can see, what you've encountered, and what the marine broadcast is telling you, to sort of come to some conclusion about it. But it's difficult. It is difficult. And so what you should do, of course, without good information, is be cautious and, scoot across open channel, not take your time in big open water situations, and kind of be aware of pullouts as you see them or pass them, so that you can seek shelter and that type of thing. But yeah, a whole different story. If you're on a big long trip off the shore and out of cell range, you're up against it, and wind can happen quickly, as we know.
Okay, we have a question from Jean Gapsis. Have you noticed any patterns in the different apps as they make their predictions?
Patterns. There's so many forecast models now, Jean, so many algorithms that they're using, that it's harder to see that. I would say that, I mentioned about Big Wave Dave, that his focus is close to shore. So that's useful. The problem with Big Wave Dave is he only has a few places that he's providing forecasts for. So you sort of have to do your own interpolation. If he's got this here and this there, then, what do I think it's going to be if I'm paddling somewhere in between there? But I would say that's an important thing to know who that forecast is for. Generally, these forecasts, the wind forecast apps, are not for kayakers, by the way. They are for sailors, and they are for motor vessel operators. And these are people who, yes, they might be near shore, but they travel out across big expanses of water. And they have, power available to them, kind of thing. So I think it's wise to be a bit cautious about being too focused on what any wind app has to say. That's why I like to look for, like I said, convergence. If almost all of them are saying it's going to be from the west, then I feel pretty confident about that. If almost all of them are saying, it's going to be 15 to 20 knots of wind, then I can be pretty confident about that. But there's always going to be some outliers, and sometimes those outliers are right. Sometimes it's the unusual prediction that turns out to be correct, but more often it's when they all have the same idea about what's going to go on. I haven't got any absolute favorites anymore. I have to say that, because my confidence in PWG and PWE has been shaken by their own validation tool. So now I'm being a little bit cautious of all of them, but maybe that's a good situation.
Okay, we have some thank yous and appreciation for the excellence of the presentation. Do we have any more questions from anybody?
I'd actually just have one more note just to add, with all these apps, only a few of them actually offer you access without having an actual customer account with them, or a registration. And it's always really worth checking what it includes to sign up with them, and how the apps, how many permissions they request on your phone and accessing other information. It's just a privacy and data issue that I hugely struggle with finding an application I find trustworthy enough, and I'm annoyed that I have to sign in with my personal information for everything these days. But it just a side note to keep an eye out for that, how much permission you give when you register.
Yeah.
Thanks, Denise.
Good point, Denise. Yeah, you do have to, even though you may not pay, you have to have an account. I know of people who use a different email address, for instance, to sign up for those and, protect themselves a little bit from maybe getting just spam mail or something like that. But privacy is important. You're right.
So Alan, if I could just make a comment.
Yes.
Sailed out here for many years and used the wind alert and sail flow apps. And for, let's say, the last 10 or 15 years, they seem to be quite accurate. And the last 3 or 4, definitely not as accurate. So that kind of speaks to Jean's comment. We've kind of put that down to climate change. So we think the apps just don't have the accuracy that they used to.
That's an excellent point. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. Yeah, with the wild weather. Yeah. I'll tell you another, this is another mea culpa story. And it's about Saanich Inlet. You can get yourself into trouble, even if you know very well, and it's accurate, what the prediction is. So we were doing a paddle once from Pat Bay, and we were going south. We thought, well, we'll go into Coles Bay. And the prediction, by the way, was for extremely strong winds. I think 50 knots. I kid you not, so to speak. So we thought, well, obviously that's exaggerated. And, it's Saanich Inlet. But, it could be extremely strong winds. So let's bear that in mind. I think they were westerly winds. And if you know Saanich Inlet, up at Pat Bay, it's wider. So there's kind of more water for it to come across and be strong or whatever. But anyhow, so we paddled out and we thought, well, there's this pull out and this pull out, and we've got some outs here if this wind does develop. And we paddled along the shoreline of whatever that first headland is south of Pat Bay. And there was, I'm not kidding, there was nothing. There was absolutely nothing. And as we continued into Coles Bay, it got even calmer. It was completely ridiculous, so now we're thinking, yeah, stupid apps, what do they know? And there was supposed to be a very strong, like almost a hurricane force wind, but we thought, well, it's probably veered away or, whatever. We're on the water, so we hadn't really been able to check again. We're paddling out the south side of Coles Bay, and we're maybe half the way out. And without exaggerating, we felt a breath of wind, like a little gusty thing. And then within, I would say, 5 minutes, there were 6-foot waves in Coles Bay, 6 feet. And they were piling in, and it was strengthening all the time, strengthening. So even the strongest and most courageous of us decided that's enough. And so we turned around to head back into the bottom of Coles Bay. That was our pullout. I don't know if you know Coles Bay, but you can imagine that the wind was coming straight into it. Very, very strong. I don't know what it was. It wasn't probably 50 knots, but it was easily 30, 35 or whatever, and creating this kind of a sea state. So we were being sort of half surfed our way back into the head of Coles Bay. And guess what? The place that we had planned to pull out had collected all the logs in that area, because they'd all been driven in there by this big wind. So there went our pullout plan, except we had some, very capable people, the first one of which landed on top of the logs and managed to scramble out and secure his kayak and then catch the next one. And we did that and got out. But I have to say that that was another lesson. We had a pullout, but we hadn't really thought about that particular problem. And we got very complacent because we had almost no wind. We learned later that we were kind of in the eye of the storm during that time. We were in the quiet place. And this storm, this very strong wind, was in fact moving. And we then, as it moved, it caught up to us. We were out of its calm place, and suddenly we were feeling the real force. So you can't be complacent at all. Even that was before maybe climate change was a factor, but I guess we're going to get more of that kind of thing too. Sudden strong winds. So best to be cautious.
And a good thing to have a cell phone so you could call a taxi to get you back to the cars.
Yeah. We called a taxi. The taxi came. It took effort to open the door of the taxi against the wind. it was unbelievable. Like, what? How did this happen? You know, but suddenly there we were. So I think, Edgar, you may be right, and Jane, that it's less predictable. And if there are predictions, yeah, I think I'm becoming more humble now. I probably should pay attention to them. But I'll tell you what, tomorrow we go from Telegraph, and we do have some pretty good pullouts. I haven't checked all the logs, but I know about some of the situations of those pullouts. And so I feel pretty confident that we'll be safe tomorrow, but best to stay safe.
Edgar, what are you constructing there?
Me,
Hmm.
I'm just getting ready for a phone call.
Oh, with all your strings? Oh,
Yeah,
Oh,
okay. Yeah,
yeah, I'm just
I thought
waiting
he
for
was
Hamilton to
knitting.
finish.
yeah. Okay, curious.
okay. I think that we're done. Thank you so much, Alan.
Thank
A
you.
lot of people have put comments on how much they appreciated this and found really valuable information from it, and really appreciated you putting it on.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. And we'll make sure that the presentation, it's been recorded, is available for you. And I also have a little list of some of those websites that I can circulate somehow. So we'll get that out to you too. Thanks for tuning in.
Many thanks. Alan.
Thank
Great.
you. That was very informative.
Thanks.